This is the Wineskins Podcast. Your hosts are Dr. Todd Seelau and Reverend Jerry Herships. Welcome to this conversation about Christianity and fresh church expressions.
Hey, welcome to our podcast. This is the first episode. It's called Wineskins with Reverend Jerry Herships and myself. I'm Dr. Todd Seelau, and I'm the pastor of a church called X-ile. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Jerry?
Sure. Yeah, I met Todd, good God, Todd, how many years ago now? 3, 4?
Yeah, 3 or 4.
Yeah. It's been a while. I'm the pastor up here at Aspen Community Church. I got put up here about a year ago by our bishop. Prior to that, I was doing a church called After Hours Denver. It was based in a bar. Actually, it was based in 4 bars. We were in a different bar every Monday night. We'd get together, and we were sort of like a floating crap game for Jesus. But that was our thing. We knocked out about 100 peanut butter and jelly lunches for the homeless. That was our call to worship. And took those down to the park, and then got some other crazy people to join us, law firms and moms groups and campers and Girl Scouts and Cub Scouts and hardware stores. And by the end, we were feeding 700 people a week and getting invited to the mayor's office on how to do best practices for food sharing with those in our community, which is probably our biggest thing was trying to engage with the homeless. And because we weren't meeting in a church, it connected with a lot of folks that aren't really down with the whole church stained glass vibe thing. So
that's what kind of brought Jerry and I together. Is my church X-ile, we meet at bars and breweries around New Mexico, and we're just about 3 years old. COVID really did a number on us, but we're doing things online now to kind of do the same thing. And they're very similar to Jerry. We really tried to engage with people that don't go to church, don't like church. A friend of mine said that it's like making a steakhouse for vegetarians and, creating a church for people that don't like church. But that's the business that Jerry and I have been in. And so we decided that we also did some feeding things. We made about 15,000 meals every year for kids. Students, like elementary school students in Albuquerque that got free or reduced lunch. We'd make meals for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack for Saturday and Sunday. Now we've kind of transitioned to help homeless folks out in downtown Albuquerque because we don't have access to being able to feed kids. The city's doing a lot, other people are doing a lot, but we don't have a way to get kids the food right now. So we're playing with some other ideas, but being missional and reaching out to people that don't really dig church that much is something that Jerry and I both feel very passionate about, and think that, I won't speak for him, but I think that that's where the church started, and that's where the church needs to go. And churches like ours, like After Hours, like X-ile churches, we have other friends doing some similar things around, and we'll have them on from time to time. But I just think that it's so important to get back to that, and so we want to regularly address this issue in this topic. And both Jerry and I are doing some things in some traditional churches as well. Most of my fundraising was done on Sundays in churches. I would go and speak and talk about evangelism and how important it is, and being missional and those kind of things. And it's the way that we raise a lot of our money. But now that churches aren't meeting on Sundays, we had to shift some ideas around. And so I am the pastor of a church in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and I preach there on Sundays. And there's an awesome group of people. And so Jerry and I both were in this kind of outside the box church model, and now we're back kind of inside the box a little bit. But I know it's changed the way that I think about and approach ministry, and I'm sure Jerry is too. So we have a foot in each place in a lot of ways. And so hopefully this is a helpful thing to help us all think about the future of the church a little bit differently.
No, I think that's really true. I think there's a Lutheran bishop. His name was Mike Reinhardt, and he said years ago, because I heard this and just blew me away. He said how did he put it? He said the secret of the mainline church and the survival of it will be for those in the churches to care as much about those outside the churches as those inside their walls. In order to embrace relevance, we will have to let go of survival. And that just blew me away, but I think he's right. I think, of course, now with COVID, the irony is that, everybody's outside the walls of the church. And so it's like, what does it look like to still be the church without the stained glass, without the organ, without the pews? And how do we actually go out and be this thing rather than attend this thing? And I think, it's forced the hand of a lot of churches. I was talking to a buddy of mine. He said, he was talking to a professor that said he's thinking this time next year, 30% of Methodist churches will close because they won't be able to adapt. They'll just they won't figure out a way to do it different. And I think the churches that will survive, and even the churches that will thrive, are the ones that are going to be able to, sort of bob and weave and figure out kind of what you did. I mean, literally go, well, shit, we wanted to feed the kids. We can't do the kids right now. We'll do the homeless. Where's their need? We'll fill it. And to me, that's about as like Jesus-minded as you can find. Is Jesus looked around and ran towards the suffering. And it's so not in our society to do that. Our society is when something hurts, get away from it. Run away from the danger and the pain. And I think Jesus was all about going, screw that. I'm going to, where the people hurt, and that's where I'm going to go. That's the work we do. And so I really think churches are just going to have to lean heavily into that pain and lean heavily into what it looks like to, and that's going to look different in every community. Where is that pain, and to try to adapt. And the churches that are stuck with just, still wanting to do the old ways, I wish them luck, but I think it's going to be hard. I really think it will be hard. Yeah. And
we're in a unique position to see things from both sides in a lot of ways. And
absolutely.
And so like we're sympathetic to everybody.
For sure.
But it's tough, and hopefully we can share some ideas, and we can learn some ideas from other people through this. But it's important to start thinking. If it wasn't important to think outside the box before, it's definitely important to think outside the box now. And speaking of outside the box,
church.
Exactly. Speaking of outside the box, we're gonna start off every episode of this since this is called Wineskins. We're gonna tell you a little bit about some wine. And Jerry has some wine he's going to tell us a little bit about today. Let's start it out here.
So, I got a Ribera del Duero from Spain, which is, this one's 100% Tempranillo. I think normally they're Tinofina. I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but I think that's the way it's pronounced, the grape, which is supposed to be very, very close a derivative of Tempranillo, which is the most widely planted grape in Spain. Normally they're kind of pricey, I think. I think like the high-end ones go for $200 or $300 a bottle. I've never had those ones. I'm sure they're very good, but screw that. There's no way I'm going to drop that kind of money, and no one's buying me any. So, but this one was relatively cheap. I mean, normally I shoot between like $12 and $15. This one was probably a little bit more than that. It's probably in the $20 pocket in there. But if you want to like up your game a little bit, and I'll tell you, man, that with a cheeseburger is pretty dope. That is like, that shit is on point when you pour that. You're like, one more glass, why not? It's a half-pound burger, for God's sake. It deserves 2 glasses of wine. So it's really good. It's fantastic. So if you ever see it on a menu and try it by the glass, it's a pretty big, tasty burger. If you got some sort of beef on your plate, that's the bomb. I mean, it's really, really good. So, and Todd, where did we get the name Wineskins? Is there a theological reference?
Yeah, well, Jesus talks about the analogy, the metaphor, right, of putting new wine into old wineskins, and the idea is that if wineskins are old, they're dried up, and the new wine expands, right, a little bit, and it busts out the old wineskins. And so I'm talking about how to do church now, or church in the future, or even church from the past. We're it's the same wine we're talking about with Jesus, but the wine skin looks different. And so we're going to explore these different kinds of wine skins in this podcast and in this conversation that Jerry and I have. And we'll have with other people as we go along.
Yeah.
So do you have any other theological insight for that?
No, I think that's solid. I think what's really cool about that is, like, let's see, After Hours is going on 11, 12 years, something like that. And when we started that, I know, I think Jim Baker's son, we were talking about him earlier. He was doing a thing in a place called the Candy Store in Brooklyn years ago, that he was the only dude I knew that was doing church in a bar. Well, now, shit, they're all over the place. And I think what's great about the Wineskins reference is, he's been saying this for millennia. I mean, since the beginning, it's like, look, man, there's this product, this wine, but you got to find new ways. You got to find new ways, because if I think a huge detriment of the church is that, to me, there's been a hair bit of arrogance around, well, they know where we are. Services are Saturday morning or Sunday morning at 9:30, and they will open the doors. They can find us, and I think it's just not that easy anymore. I think a study I read the other day said that that only 7% of people in America are looking for a church. Wow. 93% aren't looking for one. It said, and the vast majority, they said, they don't think about it. Now, it was funny because it said 2/3 of the people believe in God. So even the ones that aren't it begs the question, look, so they believe in God. A third were hardcore atheists. They weren't looking and they don't believe it. But 2/3 believe in God, but they're like, I don't think about it. I'm definitely not looking. Mm-hmm. Like, all right, so what's I'll tell you this great analogy. It wasn't mine. It was a buddy of mine, a guy named Tony Kirby. Because I posted this and I said, what are we doing wrong? If people, like, quote unquote, believe in the product, believe in God, but 90+% aren't looking for a church where supposedly that's our product, God, like, how are we screwing this up? And he gave this great analogy. He said, do you remember back like 20+ years ago when bottled water became the thing and everybody started buying bottled water and we all got sucked into it, even though, the plastic bottles were poisoning the oceans and were filling up land dumps and all kinds of crap like that. He goes, but, we were buying water. He goes, and they started testing the water in, taps, like New York City water is some of the best water in the country. He says, so the thing we were buying is actually free to anybody. It's available to everybody. He goes, but the packaging was toxic. And I was like, holy shit. Like, I mean, like, he's like, I always look at God that way. He goes, God's free. You don't need stained glass of the sanctuary to connect with God. He goes, but the churches, the packaging, and we all know, everybody's got horror stories of how that institution has been toxic for a lot of folks, where people are like, fuck, I'm just not going back. I'm just not going to go back. And so I think for us, it is about acknowledging, look, people can connect with God in tons of ways, and they sure as shit don't need the traditional church or Todd or Jerry. But I think we need to really look and go, what were the pieces that weren't working or that have just aged out? I mean, they're just not working as much anymore, and they will for a certain group of people, and we don't leave them behind. But how do we create new inroads to people? And I think that's what X-ile, I think that's what After Hours was trying to do, was how do we get people to that free God, but wrap it in something that's maybe not as toxic as people's experience in the past, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
That was like,
that's a really good metaphor.
I was like, Tony, that's the shit, man. I'm telling everybody I ever run into that, even if they don't want to talk to me, I'm like, hey, come here. So.
Well, and even in a purely business model, right? Like if most of the people aren't looking for your product, you have to go to where most of the people are, and you have to go to where there's more people, and you have to start going to them, and taking things to people in a different way. And that's what I met Jay Baker in Atlanta when he lived in Atlanta. It's funny that we have that. We've been talking for years and didn't know we had that connection. But
I didn't know that. Yeah.
So we used to talk. He had a church in a coffee shop, and we used to. I used to go there, and I used to talk with him. We'd be at some events together. My band would play it at some things that he spoke at, and he came to I think a church I worked at a couple of times, and. But he and I would talk a lot about these ideas, but it was nothing I ever really thought about doing. And then when you moved to New York and started in that bar, that was like super revolutionary. Yeah. And I thought, man, maybe one day, like, and maybe that's a good thing to talk about. Is how we kind of got into this and how our ideas, because we're not normal pastors. Which people tell me,
you could have just stopped right there. You could have just said, "We're not normal." Period. That would have been okay.
Definitely not normal pastors, and I always take that as a compliment. When people tell me we have to do some different things, and Jerry and I are wired to do things differently, and so we need to do that as much as we can, and that's really when I remember I was driving in the mountains with my parents when I was kind of contemplating ordination. Thinking about that whole thing, and one of my parents asked. My dad's a pastor, Methodist pastor. He just retired a couple years ago, and they asked me what if you could make any kind of church, or you could have any kind of church, because I'm sure I was complaining about something in the church, because that's what I did with my poor parents. And they were like, well, what kind of church would you make? If you could just make any kind of church that you wanted, like what would it be? And I was like, I played in bands and stuff, and I spent a lot of time in bars, and I really got to see what kind of happened. And honestly, I had a lot better conversations in bars with people that didn't go to church than having kind of the same, what I felt were the same kind of conversations with people in church at that time in my life anyway, because I was the preacher's kid, and, people talk to you certain ways. And so I said, I would love it if we could have a church where we were in a bar and people could drink and people could talk and people could hang out and just kind of be like we are, in bars, but then you have an intentionally spiritual kind of intentionally spiritual like motive for being there, right? Like everybody that's there is there for like a spiritual reason, but the idea isn't for me to preach to them and tell them what to think, but the idea is for us to come up with something together.
I dig that. That's a great phrasing, a spiritual motivation. I think that's pretty user friendly. I think people are like, no, I'm down. Good Lord, man. After bartending for over a decade, the number of people that had no problem having a conversation about God with me, just because it was. I think it's intriguing for people. I think people want to embrace the mystery. In fact, I think that sort of, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it sort of attitude, I think pushed a lot of people out. It was like, where do you connect with science? Where do you connect with philosophy? Where do you connect with, the average Joe? And they weren't seeing that. They were here and look, these are the rules and that's it. And, I think, for me, I came out of an entertainment background like yourself. I did comedy for 20 plus years and bartended for 10 years before that. And, I just realized how many great conversations I had in those environments, and that the people, I think the common belief was, people don't want to talk about God. I think that's bullshit. I think people want to talk about God. I think they just, they don't want to feel shamed. They don't want to be told they're wrong. They don't want to be made to feel guilty or shameful. I think but they're willing to engage. And that's what we saw with After Hours. I think, I knew early on that I wanted to do something outside traditional church. And when the bishop appointed me, we didn't even have a bar lined up. We didn't have anything. And so finally I found this Irish bar that was willing, the guy's like from, I don't know, like Limerick or, outside of Dublin or, down in Cork.
Is that a real town in Ireland, Limerick?
There is, yeah, really, truly
wow. is. I thought it was a joke. I didn't know.
In fact, the funny thing about Limerick, one of the bar owners in Denver grew up in Limerick, and Limerick is sort of the Detroit of Ireland. In fact, it's nicknamed Stab City. I mean,
wow,
it's a rough place, man. But I mean, this other bar owner, also from Ireland, he was, obviously grew up Catholic like I did, and he couldn't figure out what the hell I was talking. He's like, so they're going to be coming to church? They're going to be doing church in the bar? And his dad, he goes, well, because again, he's a bar owner, so he's like, are they going to be eating and drinking during Mass? And I said, well, during they'll be doing. He's like, well, we can try it. And nearly 100 people the very first time. And I'll tell you what, man, I've said it before, bar owners find Jesus real quick when you bring in 100 covers on a Sunday or Monday night, man. They're suddenly like, Hail Mary, man, I'm down. That stuff's great. And that bar sold it to the next Monday night and next Monday night and the next Monday. So, I mean, we're bringing in people and they like to party and have a good time and, throw back a couple beers and order some potato skins. And so it was a win for everybody. It wasn't just like, hey, and I think that's the problem. I think a lot of times these dynamics are, there's got to be something in it for everybody. Nobody's going to just want to help out a poor pastor who's looking for a place to land. It's like, hey, throw a dog a bone here. What can you do for me? And that model worked out pretty good for us,
That teaches us a lot about hospitality,
Oh, for sure. And I think there is a natural inclination. Nobody has to teach you, Todd, how to act in a bar. I mean, you're fine there. You're at home. And I think too often we miss that. I think sometimes when we've been given through circumstance or life or natural gifts, those things that we have, we tend to sometimes discount them. We like, yeah, I got that. But it's like, that's a gift, man. When you can walk into a bar and start bullshitting with a bartender, and next thing you know, you're telling about your thing and they're getting excited about it. Not all our colleagues can do that. And you know what? I wouldn't know the first thing about hunting or fishing or auto mechanics or motorcycle. Like, it's not that this thing is better than. It's like, how do we take everything God gave us, experience and otherwise, and make that work? So, I think both you and I would admit, we're not saying everybody should open a bar ministry. We're just saying, what are some other ways besides the steeple that we can connect people to God?
And connecting it to a business does a few things, I think. One theological thing that I think it does is it teaches you how to be a good guest. So it takes hospitality and it turns it around. And we don't really get a good chance to do that as pastors in a church, but even as regular church members in a church. Like, we're trying to make other people feel welcome, and we're trying to be good hosts. And we work really hard. We have hospitality committees, and we have really good flyers, and we have really pretty bulletins, and we do things or we bake bread and take it to people after. Like they're good things. It's good. It's good not to do it, to do a good job. But where do we learn how to be good guests? I cannot tell you the number of times that I've been in a bar talking to a bartender. They find out I'm a Methodist pastor, and they will name names of people I know, and they will say, that they're a real jerk or whatever, and they say they never tip well. They do this, they do this, they do this, so they get 2 drinks in them. They make an ass of themselves. I've heard story after story after story after story about other preachers. These aren't even just church members. These are other pastors, my colleagues, that don't know how to be good guests in a bar and who knows where else,
Well, I would tell people at the end of After Hours, I'm like, look, I bartended enough Sunday brunches when the churches would come in after to know, oh shit, there's not a server or bartender that wanted to work Sundays, because there is a reputation. It's not like an occasional thing. And it's not just Denver. It's Denver and Detroit and LA and Orlando and Albuquerque and you name it. Christians, unfortunately, have this rep of, just in the hospitality world, just being really shitty tippers. And I'm like, I tell my people, I'm like, look, we've got to try to swing this the other way. So I expect everybody to lay down some dough. Feel free to send them your prayers, but they got rent to pay. When I go into a place early on, I try to tip 30%. Now, of course, I order the cheapest shit on the menu so I can tip 30%, but to let the word get out. It's like, look, not all of us are this, because I think a major bitch with Christianity for so many people were, oh, you talk a good game, but then I hear you, like you said, talking shit after a couple drinks in the bar, and it's just the hypocrisy is a big thing that I'll be honest, I think you too probably, I was really leery to get into this game because I was like, okay, I am not a great guy. I've got an awful mouth and I like to throw back a couple drinks. And there really was a sense that I wasn't good enough to do this. And then, you slowly start to learn, well, you know what, that was Jesus's wheelhouse. He always got the people that were on the sidelines of society. Fishermen weren't exactly the top-notch cast of characters in Jesus's day, and yet he was the one they went to. He went to them and said, "Hey, come on, zealots, tax collectors." I mean, that was the only thing that gave me comfort. Really, was this sense of Jesus is a long history of dropping in on the island of misfit toys and grabbing the squirt gun that shoots grape jelly. I'm like, yeah, that's just my game. That's exactly who I am, and that's a comfort, and I think we need to share that more with people.
Absolutely. And I think that it's not in defense of some of these people. We don't teach in church how do you handle your liquor, or how do you act in a bar, or how do you tip. Like, we don't teach that stuff in church. We don't teach people how to be good guests usually. I'm not saying nobody ever has, but generally I've never been a part of a committee or taken a class on how to be a good guest.
That's excellent.
And so it's not really our fault or their fault, but it's something that we need to kind of address, because we're only a host, man, for like a couple hours on a Sunday. We're a guest the whole rest of the week in all these places, and people are going to see us, and people are going to know like what kind of guest we are, and we're going to, for people to only know the Methodist Church because of how like certain person acted, man, that's not good. That's not good PR.
Right. As cheesy as that song is, they'll know us. They'll know you are Christians by your love. Like, much like the what would Jesus do bracelets. Shitty marketing, but still a solid message. It's like, wow, we really managed to monetize anything that's out there. But that song is pretty solid. It's like, look, man, you can know as many Bible verses as you want. You can sit on as many committees, sing in as many choirs. You can do all that. But if you go out in the world and you're a tool, then people are going to be like, I don't care what Bible verses. And you know what? I don't want to hear your stories. I've been in bars 5, 6, 7, 8 times. It never comes up what I do. And I'm like, look, I'm not here to force it. I'm here to have like a relationship. I remember Brian McLaren had this great line where he said one time, he said, when you're starting a ministry, how did he phrase it? He said, count conversations, not conversions. Mm. And I thought that was so solid. It's like, look, man, in that regard, and I think you are too. I'm a shitty pastor when it comes to, you got to believe what I believe. Oh, and you claim Jesus Christ as your personal Lord. And I'm like, God, I look for the exits when I see those people. And I'm like, all I'm saying is this is the thing that's working for me. I don't need it to work for everybody, but I can tell you that it works. And so if you want to give it a go, great. And if you don't want to give it a go, well, screw it. Let's get another Guinness. I'm kind of that, and I know I'm supposed to be making disciples for all the world, but I'm like, in some cases, I think that mindset can do more harm than good. I think it can get in the way of authentic relationship.
Yeah, well, and that's what there's a bunch of churches, man, and I try to get to know a lot of the churches around the areas where I'm having church, because if people want that, if people want a guilt trip, or if people want to be told what to believe, like there's a lot of churches that that can do that. But I don't. We have to do something. We have to have lots of different churches. And so if we offer nothing else but diversity, that's still super valuable, like super valuable.
Yeah,
because if you walk into all these churches and you can't really tell the difference, or you can't remember which church did this or which church did that, you're going to remember what church was at the bar, right? Or
yeah, for sure. I love the line that somebody said. They said, if you want to know if your church is of value, they said, if it closed next week, would anybody outside the church care?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, you know what? In your case, there was lots of kids that would care. There's lots of homeless that would care.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, that to me really carries weight. Jim Wallace I just started flipping through God's Politics again, which I haven't read in years. And
yeah, it's a good time to do that.
He has this great line where he says, you're not allowed to call something a revolution unless it changes society.
Oh,
and I was like, that's solid. And I was like, okay, you may think, oh, this stuff is great, but how is it changing your community? Is it really doing that? And if it is, then that's dynamite. But so I want to ask you, what was, when you started out with X-ile, what were the best parts of starting out, and what were the biggest challenges starting out?
Well, the biggest challenge, see, we kind of started this idea like way back in like 2005 or 2006 or something like that, where it was just me and some friends I worked at. A pastor in Albuquerque brought me to Albuquerque to be the associate at a church to start these kind of churches, like under that church's umbrella.
And where were you before Albuquerque?
I was in Clinton, Fabens, Texas.
Okay.
So two little small towns in Texas, awesome farming towns, awesome people. I'll never forget those people, and I need to go back and visit them soon.
Cool.
They're super cool. They brought me up in a lot of ways and taught me a lot of what I know and what I do now. But I came to Albuquerque to do this exact thing because I had tried to kind of pitch it to the new church committee, and it was a little ahead of its time. This was like, about 10 years before I actually did it. And so it was a little bit ahead of its time, and nobody really was doing it. There was a couple of people that I knew of. When did you start? What year was it?
We started at St. Andrew in 2008, and then 2 years later, the bishop appointed me. And so we started in the bars 2010, 11, somewhere in there.
Yeah, so it was just a little bit before that. But we were thinking around the similar thoughts around the similar time. Right. And I just thought this was a great opportunity, so I came to Albuquerque to do that. But it's really long and complicated story. But basically, that pastor went on leave before I got there to the church, and it was at a very large church in Albuquerque, and awesome church as well. But so there was a retired pastor that was there, and there was me who came there to start things in bars and preach at the contemporary service. And all of a sudden, we are in a bit of a crisis, and so we kind of had to figure out something different to do. So I didn't end up doing what I came there to do. And then the new pastor that came obviously wasn't the one that agreed with me to do that. So, things worked out differently than what I had planned. But we had to get this was a big church, and we had to make sure that everything was okay. And so I was there for several years, just trying to help make sure that everything was stable and everything was as good as it could be. And it is, and it worked really well, and the church is doing really well. And it ended up being a really big blessing to me. But I didn't get to do what I wanted, but I still tried to do it anyway. So we started, because I guess that's what I do. But we're doing all of this, church stuff, and all of a sudden now there's all these things to do that I didn't expect to do, but I was like very stubborn, and I was like, well, this is what I'm going to do. And so we just started meeting. I got together with some friends, mostly people that didn't go to church, and we started meeting at bars, but we wouldn't let people come. And so my biggest challenge back then, when this really started, was that we did not know what we were doing, and there was no model to look for and nobody to talk to, and nobody. I was working on my dissertation, which was about this exact kind of thing, like starting a church in in this kind of way, like following the X-ile model of church, where the Israelites were booted into Babylon and Egypt, and they had to figure out how to worship God without a temple, without a community. They were scattered. And so I felt like
such a crazy metaphor for the pandemic. It's not even funny. It's like booted out of the church. How do we worship God without the temple?
Yeah.
Bam.
Yeah, that's true.
Shit, that's it.
Yeah. So that was really my biggest. And so we just would meet and talk about, like, there was probably 5 of us or 6 of us, and we just meet at bars and say, okay, what would it mean? What would it look like to worship God here? Like what would this look like? And then we would try to do it. We wouldn't sing hymns, and we wouldn't. But some Lutherans and some people are doing some really cool stuff about singing. And my friend Matt at St. John's in Albuquerque does like hymn sing at a brewery and stuff.
Nadia
are doing that.
In fact, one of the early beer and hymns that Nadia did was that I connected her with the bar owner at the Irish Snug, the guy that I told you about. Will they be eating and drinking? Well, they said that guy. And Nadia was like, "Hey, where are you doing this?" I said, "The Snug on Colfax would be ideal." And she packed the joint. There were like 200 or 300 people there. People that were just, throwing back beers and singing, Amazing Grace. And I was like, good for you guys. We never did that.
Exactly.
But you know what? The Lutherans always were like, boom, right out front with that shit. Nadia was like, I got zero problem with this. Let's do it. And they killed it. But in some ways that supports our point, which is it's not about doing anything cookie cutter. It's about how do you embrace the essence of you and bring that to the party and bring that, you just said it so well, how do we worship God here? And to your point earlier, how we worship God is, well, you tip well. You're a good guest. You treat people that are serving you like human beings and not like servants. And I mean, all that is in some ways to me, in fact, to me, to this day, that's where the Jewish faith has it all over the Christian. The Christian faith is about, the creeds. I believe in one God, the Father, I believe in, whereas the Jewish faith, it's like, okay, on this day, we do nothing. Not we think nothing or we believe nothing. We do nothing. Like it's all about action and how our lives worship God. And I've always had like an eye turn to that. I always thought that was pretty cool, that they sort of embrace that model of how do we praise God through what we do, and not just what we say. Absolutely.
And that's worship, right? And that's a different kind of worship. And I have a million stories from those early days that, that I'm sure we'll share at some point. But what got you into it? Like, what was the tipping point for you that made you want to, like, you were in a big church, you were at St. Andrews, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you want to go from that to being in the bars? Like, was it an event or a...
Yeah, it was funny. I guess I've always known this, but it's never been as clear as just now when you just asked this. And that is, so St. Andrew was in one location. They were doing fine. And I started with the senior pastor doing a Marcus Borg Heart of Christianity book study for 6 weeks. We did the first 2 weeks in the old church and the next 4 weeks in the new church. And literally we lit the candle in the sanctuary in the one church, put it and marched literally down the main drag for like a mile and a half to light the candle in the new church, which I thought was very cool. That's cool. That's a cool visual.
Yeah,
and so we got there and that was killer. And then we just blew up, man. I mean, like more and more people started coming and it was good because it was a bigger sanctuary. But then in like 3 years, the senior pastor wanted to do another build, and this build was going to be a $12 million add-on to the new building. And I was like, yeah, isn't there another place we could use $12 million? I mean, it was that, and Harvey was a great pastor, but he was definitely the pastor as CEO model. And I was sort of the Mike Slaughter missional church model pastor. And that build, the building is great now and wonderful things are happening. but it really spoke to me in regards to what does it look like to do church without this structure, because it got really top heavy. I mean, we had a staff of 36 people and a huge building and a giant footprint, and that's a lot of money to raise. And there was some hurt feelings, I think, along the way. And so I think that wasn't what got me into ministry, but that was the thing that made me go, I don't want to have to deal with buildings and churches, because either A, it's brand new, and suddenly you got, a $12 million nut you got to pay off that you're like, holy shit, how do we do this? Or it's an old church and you're like, please don't let the boiler break. Please don't let the boiler, you know what I mean? So, the church I'm in right now, Aspen Community Church, built in 1890, the same year as the J Bar in the Hotel Jerome. Coincidence? I think not. I spent a lot of time in both places. But so for me, a big piece of it, and I was sitting there, I wrestled with, and I don't know if you do this either, but you got your life in the bars, and you're a musician, and you're around a crew there, and you got your people, and then there's the church folks, and trying to figure out how to be a bridge between those two. And for me, there was a long time of going, either A, I don't know if I can do this and be my authentic self and have people accept who I am, or B, how do I infuse more of my authentic self into this Christian thing that I'm doing? Mm-hmm. And the bar was a natural answer for that. It was where I felt comfortable. It's where I knew the insider language. So everything fell in place in that regard. But I'll be honest, we started after hours in our fellowship hall at St. Anne. There was no bar in sight. But when the bishop said, go make this a standalone thing, I knew that's where we had to go. I just knew. It was just a matter of, it's one thing for me to know. It's another thing to convince other people. Yeah. No, this is really a good idea. You got to believe me here. And the truth is, I honestly probably didn't. It wasn't till we filled the place that bar owner mentioned it to another bar owner, who mentioned it to another bar owner. Because, in that inside world, it's sort of like people in our congregations. I can tell people all day to come to after hours. It's like, well, that's all well and good, but if you own the restaurant, of course you're going to tell people to go. It's got a lot more power if somebody ate there and they go, holy shit, you got to get to. It was always so gratifying when I would see people in their 25 to 35 age range bring in this new guy that they just started dating, or this new gal or brought their parents, which was mind-blowing. Normally it's like parents dragging their kids. Now kids were dragging their parents to go to after hours. That really made me feel like, okay, this was something that people were proud of. That they were like, I'm 28 and I'm not embarrassed to go here. I'm proud to go here. And that carried a lot of weight for me. That was at least an indicator that it felt like I was doing something that was in the right direction,
For sure. For sure. I remember when one of my earliest times where I knew we had to do something different, and I actually started to talk after this incident. I started to talk with some people in my little churches in Texas about what if we did church in a bar? Like, what if we went to people, because I did a funeral. I wanted to get really good at funerals, and so the funeral director went to one of my churches in Fabens, Texas, and so I asked that funeral director to let me do, if anybody didn't have a pastor, let me do the funeral, because it's a long story, but I was very dedicated to wanting to be good at funerals, because somebody publicly insulted me about my very first funeral, another pastor. So I was like, I'm going to be better than this dude at funeral. That's just how I am. And so my competitive nature got me to tell the funeral director, like, hey, let me do as many as we can. And I would do, 4 or 5 in a weekend sometimes or whatever. And I got really good at it. I got really comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And so one of these funerals where they didn't have a pastor, I don't have a real high theology of hell. In my personal theology, I don't talk about hell a lot. I don't think about hell a lot, except for what I know is kind of hell on earth for a lot of people and for myself. And I focus on that because I know that. But if there's a hell, like I did this funeral and this dude I was doing this funeral for is like was going there, right? If there's a hell, this dude's going. And at funerals, I always try to, you focus on the good things and you lift up things and you're hopeful and it's for the people that are still alive and all those things. And, man, I didn't have anything to say about this guy. And I mean, he basically had he cheated on the one group of kids' mother who was dying of cancer with the nurse. The mother recovered. He left her and started this other family. So you have these two families here. Anyway, big mess, right? And I didn't know what to do about it, but I knew this is something I haven't really faced before, because I could always be hopeful enough to think, well, God's grace covers everybody, but this dude did some really bad stuff. That was just the tip of the iceberg. I won't get into details, but this dude is a bad dude, did a lot of bad things. And that's all anybody could talk about. I found no redeeming qualities about this guy. So as I was driving home from that meeting with the family, I was just struck by this idea that if there is a hell and this guy was there, where was I? How did I never meet? I'm in Fabens, Texas. How did I never meet this dude?
Right.
We never hang out? How do we never cross paths? How have I never heard of him? Right. And he raced dogs and he was, a lot of things. So he's always at the track and I was like, man, then I need to be at the track. What if I could have made a difference in this guy? At least I wanted to have a shot at it, a shot at helping this guy understand something bigger than him or whatever. And I just pulled over the side of the road, just tears were just streaming down my face. And I told some of the people in my church, some of the farmers, I was like, man, we gotta be in the places where these guys are, if you know some of these people that are hanging out at places where I'm never going to meet them, invite me, let's go hang out with them. Let's go, we got to start going to people, because he was never going to go to church. His family told me, well, he didn't even want a funeral. He didn't want us to talk about God. And I was like, well, he doesn't have a vote. We're going to, he lost that. We're going to do it and we're going to pray for him and we're going to try to lift up some things, but I had nothing. And there's 14-year-old daughter. Most of his kids were older, in their 30s and 40s, but the 14-year-old daughter from the nurse asked if she could write a poem. And I was like, yeah, sure. And I said, in fact, if you want to read that, I don't really have anything to talk about. So if you'd like to read it,
How long is the poem? Could you make the poem longer?
Exactly. So, and she said, she agreed. And I said, well, if you can't, I'll be happy to read it. And she stole the show when she stood up there and she read the most beautiful poem, and the love that her father taught her to ride a bike, things that stories nobody ever heard or ever knew. I mean, everyone was just bawling. And we heard the side of this man from this little girl's eyes that nobody had ever, seen before. And they didn't, it was a man that nobody really knew, and a side of him that people didn't know. And so it was really cool. Redemption, there's a lot to that, but it sent me the message that I gotta be at where these people are, we all do, as a community, but if I'm not going to go there, how do I expect, people, think about the people in our churches, who's going to go to the dog races?
Absolutely. I mean, but you know what? It's the irony of the whole story is that's exactly where Jesus would be. Yeah. We know that. We've been given these gospel stories that go, that people talk shit about him all the time because there's man, he hangs around with lepers and hookers and tax collectors, and said nobody wanted to hang around with those people. And Jesus was like, I'll hang around with them. I mean, to me, it's such a, I wonder if Jesus is up there going, oh my God, how did they miss this? Because he's probably going, yes, Todd, the track. Duh. Get your ass over there. And in the bars. And I remember there was a pastor that I knew that used to work for, I think, a trucking company, and was a woman. And she used to have meetings with all the trucking managers and stuff, and they would try to throw her, and they would, have her go to strip clubs and stuff like that. And she goes, that didn't faze me at all. She goes, in fact, I've even thought I would love to do that ministry. And I thought, man, if she ever did, that would be awesome. Like to have, first off, a woman pastor, which, face it, there's a lot of denominations that still freaks people out. They can't even fathom that. And, we're lucky that we belong to a progressive denomination that's down with that. And I just thought, you know what? Look at all the places that get pretty dark. The track and strip clubs and bars and places where people are lonely and hurting and broken. And I'm like, all right, we're supposed to run to those places. And it's like, how do we do that? And I think there's one, thank God you did that funeral. That's one of those one moments when you're like, wow, two roads diverge in the wood. That to me was a moment when it changed the direction of your career. But the other piece is that, look, man, I think I've got Simul Ustasek Peccator tattooed on my skin because I'm a full believer in no one's as bad as you think they are, and no one's as good as you think they are either. And where we get in trouble is when we start thinking people, are just the shit, the be-all, end-all, and inevitably they're going to disappoint us. And when there's some cat like this that spends all his time hanging out the track, is teaching this little girl how to ride a bike. And she's writing a poem about it. We are all a mixed bag, and I think the church has not been quick enough to recognize that. And I think that's why I think the work you're doing is incredible. I work with very few other pastors, in part because, quite frankly, I don't know. I don't know if I could work with Pat if I didn't truly buy all in, push all my chips in and believe in what they're doing. And then I'm willing to be a dialogue and conversation. I get excited. So I think, that one funeral changed the direction of your life, of your ministry. That's pretty badass. That really is cool.
And it came from a place of pride and a place of, you trace it back, but every great thing that happens in the Bible, it starts with something messed up, right?
Right.
God redeems it, and God redeems it. This guy did a lot of things, but God redeemed, even his mistakes,
right,
through all this. And now people that are touched by our churches and the stuff we do, it has to do with that guy's life, and he might not have wanted anything to do with God, but, God used this dude in some pretty powerful ways, which is pretty awesome.
I'm picturing this guy up in heaven and Jesus going, hey, Carl, come here. You're not going to believe this. Check this out.
Yeah.
It's like, no shit, what's that? It's like, you started that. It's like, what? Talk about crazy, but really, that to me is, that's why I think there's an excitement. And we miss this, man. It's like, why aren't every conversations, Pastor, have like this? Why isn't it like this? We miss the idea that there is an excitement to the gospel, and it's just become lame, and so many times like Melba toast, and it's like, to me, if there's a great story, it's like shit gets redeemed. There's a resurrection to be had. In fact, I think it'll be fascinating. Whatever the church looks like, it's pretty hard to have a resurrection without a death. And so, I preached last week. I said, yeah, we can sit there and bitch and moan about how awful the church is right now, and, oh, what are we going to do? And, oh, my God. Or we can go, this might be the biggest opportunity in Christendom that we've had, is this idea. The pandemic, we haven't seen that since 1913. This is a worldwide event, and we can really change what church looks like. The question is whether we're going to have, the guts to do it. And I think the jury's still out. I don't know. But these conversations to me are the spark, are to me what gets people excited. And I think, man, if even one person that ends up watching this goes, you know what, screw it. Those guys had the balls to do it. Why don't I give it a try?
Yeah.
I'm like, hell yeah. You know what I mean? What do they say? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Right.
Like, go for it. You know what I mean? And you know what? We could both tell horror stories about shit that went wrong. I mean, like we put all our chips in and it just didn't flow, or, you know, I mean, I've done just dumb things, just dumb. And, you know, looking back, I'm like, no, I see why that was dumb, but it sounded good at the time. You know, I mean, it sounded really good. But then you get up off the ground and you dust yourself off and you go, man, I got tagged there. Okay, shake it off, you know, rub dirt in the hurt, get on, just go and try it again. That to me is, I mean, that's the other reason why I've always been so impressed with you, is like, man, you get knocked on your ass and you're like, well, it's sort of like the funeral. You're like, well, screw that. I'll be damned if I'm going to let them keep me down. You know, I mean, you get back up and you give it another go. I think the church needs more of that, you know.
I just wanted to be better at funerals than this. And I don't know if I ever did, but that was my life. Man, I didn't really care about anything else at that moment. I was so embarrassed and so pissed off that like, I'm just like, well, I'm just going to be the funeral guy now, you know, because I'm not going to do another, like, people get one funeral. People get, you know, these days get several weddings sometimes, but only one funeral, you know.
Swear to God, man, you hit it right on the head. To this day, I almost from the beginning never got nervous doing weddings, even though I know, like, the bride wanted it all to be perfect. And I knew, because I always tell them, I'm like, you know, at the end of the day, you're going to be married. That's what you need to focus on.
Yeah.
But funerals, they get one. Mm-hmm. I mean, and to this day, I still get nervous. I'm like, that to me is, it just feels like there's so much pressure to give comfort, you know. And let's face it, both of us and any, you know, the 7 people watching this, you know, we've all been to shitty funerals. I mean, we've all been to horrible. Either the theology is so bad you cringe, or just technically it just comes off horrible. Yeah. You know, it's just bad. So, you know, if I can get through and give people some hope, and, you know, I tell people, look, I'm totally down with the idea of celebrating somebody's life, but there's a reason to grieve. Yeah. You know, I mean, tears aren't bad, and so you can do both. And to this day, the pressure's on me. In fact, the next funeral I do, I'm calling your ass. I'm going to say, hey, don't get off the ledge, man, because I'm all stressed out. So
the best thing, my favorite thing about funerals is I meet with the family night before, and people are eating and drinking, and we just like have a party basically, and we just tell stories, and I just get people to tell stories, and I give people permission to grieve in their own way. And I learned that's I don't need to know the person. So if I do, that's better. But if I don't, I'll know the person by the end of that party. You know, right. So partying before a funeral, man, it opens everything up. That's my favorite part, not just the party, but I mean, that's where you get the stories. That's where that's where healing starts to take place, and that's where, and that's my favorite part. The service is a formality. You know, in a lot of ways, but you just retell stories, or you get other people to tell those stories. But man, I love just what happens with the family, you know, before the funeral. And
there's a great tradition and I remember in Coco, I think they mentioned it in the Disney movie, but I know it from the Jewish tradition, and that is a person dies twice, once when they take their last breath, and then the last time their name is set up. And so I always include that when I do funerals, and I say,
that's good.
If you want to know how to keep so-and-so's spirit alive, you have to tell their stories. Like you have to tell the story of, you know, do you remember that time when Gene was trying to get the Volkswagen across the border and got stopped by the patrol, and then he went the other route and they busted him? You know, it's like you have to keep telling those stories, and in that way they stay alive in your heart, and their spirit stays alive. And let's face it, I mean, that's the story of Christianity.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody was standing at the cross going, hold on, can I get your name? Tell me the spelling on that again. Is that Mary with a traditional M? Is that what, I mean, like the stories were oral. Like that's how we kept it alive in the beginning. And I'm like, here we are 2,000 years later. It's like, this is all making me think, you know what, I got to do a sermon on storytelling now because there's a lot there. There's a lot of power in that.
And we both love comedy, and that's I think part of what it is too. That laughter is healing, and at funerals people need healing, and when people can laugh and they can joke and they can remember funny stories, and people like to laugh at there's something healing about that.
There is.
And it's much more comfortable, right? Like nobody wants to laugh at a wedding. like there's not like a lot, right? So maybe you say something cute, but I mean
that's more form to laugh at a wedding.
Yeah.
It's not a good
at a wet, right? But but there's something that in comedians and have this pain, and there's something about pain and humor and all those things that just touches my heart in a way that I love funerals, and that's really cool. That's a really cool thing to include too. I'm going to steal that from you.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. I steal it too. I love that stuff. And it's funny you mentioned the pain and the comedy. It's not a stretch. Nobody would argue the fact that the world of comedy has been dominated so much by African American population and the Jewish population. And you look and say, where's the common denominator? It's like, talk about two cultures that just continually have had their ass handed to them, like by society, by no matter where they go, they just get stomped on. And in some cases, literally. And for comedians to be able to push through that pain and come out the other side with comedy and sort of get up off the ground and dust themselves off and say, no, you know what, I'm going to take that pain and I'm going to, and once again, I'm going to transform it. I'm going to turn it into something new and better. I mean, it's a great metaphor for the ways that we can live, which is how do we take this pain and transform it into something good? And I mean, to me, again, that's like a central Christian message, is this transformation of this ugly, dark, crappy death and making it into this new birth, this new life of something. It's like, that's pretty badass. You know what I mean? When you think about it, that's like, who wouldn't want that? Who wouldn't want to transform all the lousy stuff and turn it into something beautiful? I mean, right. And to me, that's what comedians have done so well, specifically those who come from a background that has had tremendous trauma and strife and suffering. To be able to turn that into something good is pretty amazing.
Absolutely. That's redemption. That's
totally.
Redemption at its very base level, and that's awesome.
Totally.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We're you have any final thoughts, Jerry, about any of this?
No, I'm going to have a cheeseburger because there's still a lot of wine left in the bottle. So that's my final thought there. But this is so much fun, man. You are so easy to riff with, and it's just thanks for asking me to be on, because it's a pleasure. I enjoy this.
For sure, man. We'll do this every month. Maybe like these will probably air maybe the first Thursday of every month is what I'm thinking, and we'll record them a little bit beforehand and put them out. But if put any comments in the comments section and have a conversation with us, and we'll chime in. And if you want to start something new, we're all on level playing field now. Bars are shut down, churches are shut down. Like, we're all in a place where we don't know what we're doing, and so we're all in good company. Like, totally. All of our plans are messed up, no matter what we're doing.
Right.
Let's learn from this together and move forward together in all of our different ways.
For sure.
Thanks a lot, Jerry, and thank you, everyone. And I will, and we'll see you next month.